Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. Global Connections Television is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. We'd invite our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous programs. Also, if you're involved with any type of media outlet, be it a PBS or community access television station, or perhaps you're with a university or a high school or middle school that has an intra-campus television hookup, or you just have a website and you like our shows and you'd like to share them, please feel free to do so. Global Connections Television is provided at no cost as a public service to better help us understand international issues and how they impact our lives. Today we're taking a look at aquaculture. This is a very important area, especially since we see that the oceans are being overfished and really the fish supplies are dwindling. My guest today is an expert on this particular topic. My guest today is Dr. Jim Tidwell. Dr. Tidwell is the chair of the Kentucky State University School of Aquaculture in Frankfort, Kentucky, USA. Dr. Tidwell, welcome to today's program.
Thank you, Bill. Pleasure to be here.
Appreciate you being back with me. We haven't done this for about 8 years, something like that.
Is it that long?
It's been a long time. But anyway, excuse me, there's a lot developing in the aquaculture area. Jim, let's start off with just a broad overview, brief definition. What is aquaculture? How would you define it?
The most correct definition is the production of aquatic animals or plants under controlled conditions. But the most common way and easiest way to define it is underwater agriculture.
That'll do it.
Yeah.
Underwater agriculture.
Yeah.
That'll do the trick. Yeah. Well, great. Well, we're going to get into it in just a moment, but let's talk about Kentucky State University. You've got a premier program. In fact, I read not long ago, your program is one of the top 3 in the country. Is that right? Did I read that correctly?
That's correct. Yeah. And that is as described by our peers on the quality of our work, the quality of our graduates, the quality of our research and teaching, and basically overall impact. So we were kind of nominated as the program of distinction for Kentucky State University. Part of that is national standing. So at the time, we sent out contact to our peer institutions and said, where would you rank this? And we fell out in the top 3 to 5 in the country.
Great. Yeah. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
That's wonderful. Now, at Kentucky State University, how many ponds do you have? How big are your ponds? How many students do you have?
Okay. Well, the overall facility's been there since the mid-'80s. About 1987 is when I came. There's 33 research ponds. Those ponds are about 1/10 of an acre each, and that's a standard research plot. So that our peer institutions like Auburn University or LSU or Texas A&M, other schools like that, use the same size of pond so that our results are comparable. We also have a number of buildings dedicated to different subjects. So there's a building that does entirely nutrition type work, fish nutrition, shrimp nutrition, hatchery facilities, and we have a relatively new building, although it's about 5 or 6 years old now, that's looking at the next generation of technologies, more indoor recirculating controlled environment type systems. So we have an undergraduate program that's part of our overall ag degree. It's a concentration area. It's an option, we call it, in the ag degree. We normally have about 10 or so undergraduates in that program. What we've had longest is actually a Master of Science degree in aquaculture and aquatic sciences, and we normally carry 12 to 15 graduate students in that program.
And our viewers can go to your website, ksuaquaculture.org, to get more information.
It's the hub of the wheel. Anything from our research to our teaching to our outreach and extension is available on that website.
And do you have, what types of fishes are you focusing on? Tilapia, catfish?
We do all those,
salmon,
and really probably
I don't know, I'm asking.
What our program is best known for is alternative species. So that's kind of what we work on, is new and developing new species. Our primary species in the United States is catfish and trout, rainbow trout. So we've worked on a lot of other species. like walleye, yellow perch, freshwater prawns. We're working on saltwater shrimp and tanks. We do a lot of largemouth bass. We've got a book coming out soon on culture of largemouth bass as an aquaculture species. It's big in the United States. It's very big in China, of all places. They raise a lot of largemouth bass. So really what we do is a lot of different species. We've done paddlefish over the years. People recognize the paddlefish as one of our projects. Dr. Mims retired, and Dr. Simmons kind of picked that up and had a background in the same.
Exactly. And what we're talking about here is in Kentucky, but this applies around the United States and around the world.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's move into the international arena, aquaculture. I mentioned about the oceans being overfished. How severe is this problem? Why is aquaculture why is it important now? Why will it be important 5, 10 years from now?
Well, the simple numbers to that is a lot of the fisheries are overfished, and about 75% of the ocean fisheries, and a fishery is a population, what we consider a commercial population of fish in the ocean. About 75% of those are at what we call maximum sustainable yield. They're all the fish they can catch out of that without actually depleting the population. About 25% of those are actually threatened by the level of fishing on those. If you take 3 steps back and look at the whole ocean, we're producing a fairly consistent supply out of that. Certain species come and go, but the supply of fish coming out of the ocean is a fairly static number that's somewhat sustainable if we manage it correctly. Certain individual species, not so much, but overall flat production. The difference is the human population grows every year. We can't get any more fish out of the oceans. The only other place to get it is through aquaculture. So aquaculture right now, about 5 years ago, we passed the point where 50% was coming from wild capture fisheries in the ocean, 50% was coming from farms. Now the majority actually comes from farms. So that has actually, that teeter-totter has swung toward aquaculture, and aquaculture will just continue to grow because wild capture fisheries can't. It's the only other source. And it's really the only major food item that we still get at the hunter-gatherer stage of go out and hunt down wild animals and harvest them. So, but we're becoming farmers in this area as well.
Underwater farming.
Yes, sir.
That's exactly what we're doing. Very true. We've seen these huge trawlers, these fish trawlers go out and throw out these gigantic nets and pull all types of fish in, and most of them they throw away. They don't, they kill them, or they don't kill them, they just die, and they throw them out. Yeah. And we also see, for example, like in China, so many sharks. The shark fins are a great delicacy. How damaging is this to the fishes in the sea, both those events?
It's very damaging. Most of those big trawls, like the bottom trawls that they use for different species, are totally indiscriminate. They're like a bulldozer going across the bottom of the ocean. So they're catching everything out there, not just the target species they're after, but every other living organism that's out there. So even if they are not what they're looking for, what they call bycatch, they push it back over the side. 99% of those die from the stress of being captured. And then you got bycatch, like you said, some of those sharks are being targeted. Others, when they're fishing for things like billfish, swordfish, they capture sharks at the same time. When you go out to trawl for shrimp, catching turtles is one of the sea turtles is one of the issues that you get into. So, and even if you look at, people say, buy wild shrimp as if it's better for the environment. For every pound of wild shrimp that's harvested, 9 to 10 pounds of bycatch also come up, and most of those are pushed back over the side and don't make it. And a lot of those are juveniles of sport fish that people want to capture later when they get bigger.
And we see right now we have about 7.5 billion people on the planet. Soon, according to the UN statistics, to hit 9 billion or more by 2050. We all seen pictures of these plastic islands that are out floating in the Pacific and wherever, when these gyres, these cross currents come together and all this plastic, all this debris and garbage floating around comes together and coagulates, so to speak. I've heard figures, and I may be wrong on this date, but they say that within like 20 years, there will be more weight of plastic junk floating in the ocean than there will be fish in the ocean. Have you heard that figure?
I've seen some of those figures. It's feasible. It's possible. The reason is most of those plastics don't degrade. They're not biodegradable. So you make a Tide container and it's around for decades.
That's right.
And we make them every year and they accumulate. And people they can't really picture a gyre. A gyre is basically an eddy. If you go to the river, you go to the creek, you'll see a place where it just, the water currents swirl and hold things there. A great example is we have a beautiful scenic Cumberland Falls here in Kentucky that's just a gorgeous place to go. And you walk out in the overlook and you look down and it looks like every detergent bottle and basketball from eastern Kentucky. I've seen it when it must have been 10 feet thick right there. So that accumulation and it just piles up right there. And if you put that on a worldwide scale in our oceans, you can imagine the magnitude.
Fortunately, there are people, scientists and entrepreneurs who are trying to figure out what to do with these gigantic islands of plastic. And as you mentioned, they'll be there for eons. I mean, I think it takes like 400 years for them to break down in some cases.
Depending on the particular plastic.
Right, exactly, yeah. So
the other thing that's a big issue now is the microplastics. When we buy these, especially soaps and things that have a little bit of abrasion in them, those are little bitty plastic pellets. And those really are starting to permeate our aquatic systems. Some of the juvenile fish, they look like a zooplankton or an algae organism, and they're eating them, they're accumulating in the systems and things like that. So it's not just big chunks of plastic, it's the micro pellets, microplastics that some people have more concerns over.
And that would include eye makeup, cosmetics, things like that?
It's in a lot of things that people would never realize, even toothpaste and things like that.
And we're going to wind up eating it at some point if we eat fish, which most of us do.
Yeah, but it's more what it's doing to the ecosystem from the base up is the real concerns there. Yeah.
Another thing that is another phenomenon that's really been impacting the world, has been for years, and we're starting to talk more and more about, is climate change. And we see that the glaciers are melting, desertification is taking place. We see that there's a bleaching of the reefs.
Coral reefs.
The Great Barrier Reef is under tremendous stress in Australia. But this is a major problem, and I'm sure it ties into what you're doing. The UN just came out, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, just a couple of days ago, came out with a very, very resounding report saying that we've got about 10 years to try to get this climate change mess under control, or this planet will be uninhabitable. And we can see every year it's getting warmer, it's getting hotter and hotter, and the conditions are getting more adverse. How does that climate change play into what you're doing, and what are the aquaculturalists suggesting as to what to do to help really not reverse, but slow down climate change?
Well, climate change is one of those things that politicians argue about and scientists don't. It's largely accepted. The other thing is, whether you believe it or not doesn't change a fact from being a fact. Just because you don't believe it doesn't change the facts associated with it. So we're trying to figure out what it's going to do to aquaculture. The animals we work with, all the fish and shrimp that we work with, are cold-blooded animals. They can't regulate their own body temperature. Their physiology is regulated by the temperature of the water that they live in, and they have no control over that. So in some ways, we're more subject to the impacts of climate change than other species that you could be dealing with. Some of the things that we're working with are different ways to sequester carbon. Algae is one of the best ways to pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So we've done different work even here in Kentucky with University of Kentucky Applied Energy and at the time EKU and even a little bit with Alltech, looking at using algae as CO2 scrubbers to actually pull the CO2 back out of the atmosphere, to be able to continue to use coal by reducing the carbon released into the atmosphere.
Has that been successful as far as using coal? It seems coal is a dying industry. There's no doubt. And it's primarily because of gas, because of fracking. That's what's really making the difference. But is coal actually viable?
Well, you're getting out of my range of expertise, and I'll be the first one to admit that. But, you see a lot on TV, but an interesting statistic I saw, there's more people work for Hardee's than there is mine coal these days. So coal, just the fact that you're digging rocks and transporting rocks rather than shooting gas through a pipeline. Like I said, the biggest impact on coal has been cheap natural gas. Capitalism follows the economics, and that's why you've seen even coal-fired power plants switch over to natural gas. So it's not anybody loves coal or coal miners or hates. It's economics that's shifted.
Exactly. That's right. Yeah, and a lot of the coal miners are transitioning, even over in East Kentucky, a coal-bearing area. I think they put in a solar cell plant over there, power plant. The Kentucky Coal Museum
has solar panels on the roof.
Solar panels on the roof. What is it? That's a sign of the future, no doubt about it. Well, you've got a lot of partners, I'm sure. And who are some of your partners? I know the UN has been very prominent in this. UN Food and Agriculture Organization. It's one agency. There are many others that are very interested in what you're doing and have been very helpful. But how have you interacted with them?
Well, the Food and Agriculture Organization, which is the arm of the United Nations that looks at little things like, can we feed a population of 9 billion in the future? They're really our best source of statistics, trends, and things like that. So we go to them for the big numbers, dealing with the big issues outside of borders, worldwide type changes and trends. We also have a National Aquaculture Association that's more of a group representing the aquaculture industry in the United States, which is about a $1.3 billion industry now. And then we get down to state associations like our Kentucky Aquaculture Association. We also have more science-based, scholarly, scientific societies. Our United States Aquaculture Association is one of those, and the World Aquaculture Society is another of those. And there's different groups. There's even a global aquaculture advocate that has more of a advocacy role where the scientific organizations really don't advocate their source of unbiased information.
Were you not the chair of the World Aquaculture Association about 10 years ago?
I've been president of both the U.S. Aquaculture Society and the World Aquaculture Society.
Oh, my goodness. Congratulations on
both
both
fronts. That's where this gray hair came from.
That'll do it. That'll do it, yes. Well, Jim, you've been involved in providing technical assistance. I know when we had a Sister Cities program in Frankfort, Kentucky, you had one with San Pedro de Macorís in the Dominican Republic. You were involved in providing technical assistance. You've been to India, Ethiopia, several other countries, I'm sure. What type of, just an example or two of some of the technical assistance you've provided in those countries?
With Dominican Republic, after you and I went, I've made several trips back beyond the sister cities, the relationships that we built on that trip. I've worked with their national, what would be the Agriculture Research Service in the United States, the Dominican version of that. Help them set up some experiments to look at producing their own feeds, aquaculture feeds down there, look at some of their local products and byproducts as potential feed ingredients. And actually the work we did in Ethiopia was some of the same type of research. We actually sent a little team over there to help them and provided some equipment to help them set up to make aquaculture feeds, test them, evaluate them in an experimental basis, working with one of the universities over there. So a lot of that work has been nutrition-related work. I've also had a group working in Senegal on a different tangent, looking at reproducing a freshwater shrimp that lives in their rivers as a biological method to control schistosomiasis over there. So,
oh, really?
So that's a pretty different one, but a pretty neat project.
Yeah. Now, schistosomiasis, that's a liver fluke. Is that
It's
what
a
it
parasite.
is?
It's a liver fluke. Yep. And it has a complicated life cycle. It has to go through people, but it has to also go through a snail that releases the tomates that go back out. And we were looking at replacing the freshwater shrimp that used to live in the river, used to eat that snail and cut the life cycle. They built a dam so the shrimp had died out. So we were looking at setting up a hatchery to replace the shrimp to graze down the snails to break the life cycle of the disease organism.
Mm-hmm. Now you've been in this field for I'll say at least 3 or 4 decades, something like that.
Yep.
What have been some of the major breakthroughs that you've seen? What have been some of the changes? I'm sure it's been revolutionary, probably in most cases.
Most of it's evolution, not revolution.
Evolution, not
it's
revolution.
a gradual process. That's something I have to explain to our master's students all the time. They want to save the world with one experiment. And it's a brick in the wall type of approach.
That's right. Build the foundation.
So you have to gain an understanding. You answer, experiments answer usually one question and generate 3 more questions and answer 1 or 2 of those. So it's a process. Probably the biggest change overall is the explosion of aquaculture in China. China represents over 2/3 of the world's aquaculture. So they really dominate this industry. And you throw in a couple of other Asian countries around them, and over 90% of the world's aquaculture goes on in Asian countries.
That's interesting too, because China, out of the 7.6 billion people we have, they're like 1.3 billion right now, but they've certainly invested heavily in this particular area, obviously because they see the importance of it.
And most of your Asian countries are much larger consumers of fish and seafood. The average American eats 15, 16 pounds of fish per person per year. Asian populations may eat over 100 pounds per person per year. So they're just much bigger consumers of fish than we are.
Well, they certainly have a vested interest in it, no doubt about that, yes. Well, Jim, as you look over the horizon, we've been talking about the past 30, 40 years, whatever, what do you see as the major challenge or challenges to aquaculture production as we move forward? I'm sure climate change is one of them, obviously.
Well, and one of the things that we're looking at that would address that as well as other issues is controlled environment aquaculture, where we take it indoors. We raise fish instead of ponds, which is still the dominant production method, not only in the U.S., but really around the world. And we're looking at technologies where we take it indoors. Fish being cold-blooded, most of them don't grow in the winter. So now we have them in a temperature where they're growing continuously. We can control exactly what's in the feed. We can control the water quality because it's whatever we make it. So that controlled environment allows us to eliminate any kind of contamination from outside, keep them in an optimum health and growth situation. And climate change can do whatever it wants because the climate's whatever we tell it to be inside that building that we're producing in. So probably the biggest trends I see is going to be more towards a controlled environment type system.
Is there much difference between the controlled farm fish versus the wild fish as far as the health standpoint or a taste, that type of thing?
You know, there's a tremendous amount of misinformation on the internet. And to be honest with you, people shouldn't get their nutritional information from Dr. Oz or the John Tesh radio show. There's so much really poor information that's out there and is not based in science. Farm fish can be just as healthy or healthier than wild fish. Wild fish are exposed to contaminants that farm fish are not in most situations. A lot of what you see at times about farm fish, the only way in for anything contaminants to get into the fish is through the feed. And if the feed has contaminants in it, it actually says more about what we're doing to our environment, where we're growing those soybeans or the ocean where that fish meal came from, than it is anything about farmed fish. So it really says more about our environment than it does about the production method.
It certainly does. Well, Dr. Jim Tidwell, you've got an exemplary program at Kentucky State University. Aquaculture is very important today, and it's going to be even more important in the future. And of course, as we deal with all the ravages of climate change, it's going to be more challenging for all of us, but we're going to have to move forward together. But I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Bill.
I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.